To understand the empire, one must first understand the ghetto. This is the Judengasse, the Jews' lane of Frankfurt, circa 1760. A mere 12 feet wide in places, it was home to over 3,000 people, crammed into a few hundred houses. Its gates were locked at night and on Christian holidays. By law, only a limited number of Jewish families were permitted to live here, their lives circumscribed by 1,000 petty and not so petty restrictions. They could not own land, practice most trades, or marry without permission. This was not just a neighborhood, it was a prison of circumstance. Yet, within these oppressive walls, ambition could burn brighter than any fire. Here, in a house marked with a red shield, some Rothschild, a boy named Mayer Amschel Rothschild was born in 1744. His father, Amschel Moses Bauer, was a small-time money changer and trader, a man who navigated the limited economic avenues available to him with quiet perseverance. The red shield was not just an address. It was the origin of a name that would echo through history: Rothschild. The young Mayer Amschel was intellectually gifted. His father, recognizing this, sent him to study at a rabbinical school in Fürth, with the hope that he would become a rabbi, a position of respect and learning within the confined Jewish world. For a time, he immersed himself in the Talmud, training his mind in complex legalistic argument and textual interpretation. This training would later prove invaluable, not in theological debate, but in the intricate world of finance and contract law. However, destiny, in the form of a dual tragedy, intervened. A plague swept through Frankfurt, claiming both his parents. The path to becoming a rabbi was closed. The teenage Mayer Amschel was now an orphan, responsible for his future. He found his way to the city of Hanover, where he secured a position as a clerk at the bank of Wolf Jakob Oppenheimer. This was his first true exposure to the world beyond the ghetto, to the mechanisms of high finance that powered the principalities and duchies of Germany. It was here that he ceased to be a student of scripture and became an apprentice to capital. He learned about bills of exchange, international trade, credit, and the delicate art of assessing risk. But more importantly, he discovered a niche passion that would become his Trojan horse into the halls of power: numismatics, the study and collection of coins and medals. In the 18th century, coin collecting was not merely a hobby for the eccentric. It was a passion for princes. It spoke of classical education, historical awareness, and refined taste. Mayer Amschel, with his meticulous mind, found he had a natural talent for it. He learned to identify rare issues, discern their provenance, and understand their value. After several years in Hanover, he returned to Frankfurt, a young man now armed not with rabbinical knowledge, but with financial acumen and a specialist's expertise. He took over his father's business and began to methodically build his network. He compiled catalogs of his coins, sending them to wealthy and influential collectors across Europe. He was persistent, but not pushy, knowledgeable, but not arrogant. He understood that he was selling to his social superiors and conducted himself with a deference that masked a fierce ambition. His reputation as a reliable and expert dealer in rare coins began to grow, and then he found his patron. Prince Wilhelm IX of Hesse-Kassel was one of the wealthiest men in all of Europe. His fortune did not come solely from his lands, but from a macabre and profitable trade. He was a mercenary prince. He rented out his superbly trained soldiers to the highest bidder. Most famously, his Hessian troops were sent to fight for the British against the American colonists in their war for independence. The British treasury paid him a fortune for these men, and Wilhelm, a canny financier in his own right, needed someone to manage and invest this flood of capital. He was also, fortuitously, a voracious coin collector. Mayer Amschel, through patience and impeccable service, became Wilhelm's primary agent for coins. He would travel to the prince's palace, not through the grand front entrance, but through the back, as befitted a Jewish merchant. But once inside, he was treated with respect. He would lay out his wares, explaining the history and rarity of each piece. He was more than a salesman. He was a curator, an educator. He gained Wilhelm's trust, one coin at a time. This trust soon transcended numismatics. Wilhelm began to entrust Mayer Amschel with small financial transactions, discounting bills of exchange from other merchants, facilitating small international transfers. The Jew from the ghetto was proving himself to be discreet, efficient, and scrupulously honest. He was becoming the prince's private banker, a shadow financier. This relationship was the crucible in which the Rothschild fortune was first forged. The capital provided by Wilhelm's immense wealth gave Mayer Amschel the liquidity to operate on a much larger scale. But Mayer Amschel's true genius was not in his relationship with Wilhelm. It was in his vision for his family. He had 5 sons: Amschel, Salomon, Nathan, Kalman, later Karl, and Jacob, later James. He did not see them as individual heirs to an inheritance. He saw them as the 5 fingers of a single hand, each to be placed in a strategic nerve center of Europe. He trained them relentlessly in the business, teaching them his methods, his network, and his unwavering principle of trust. The scene of his death in 1812 has passed into legend, a foundational myth for the dynasty. On his deathbed, surrounded by his 5 sons, he reportedly laid down the family constitution, a set of rules that would ensure their unity and power for generations to come. All key partnership positions were to be held by family members. No outsiders were to be let into the inner sanctum of the business. This ensured loyalty and secrecy. The brothers were to operate in close cooperation. They would communicate constantly, acting as a single, cohesive firm across borders. A dispute between brothers was to be settled internally, and a united front presented to the world to keep the vast fortune within the family and the faith. They were to intermarry with cousins or other Jews. For generations, Rothschilds would marry Rothschilds or other select Jewish families, creating a tight-knit clan. They were never to publicly disclose the full extent of their wealth. Mystery was a tool of power. They were to maintain their own private communication network, a web of couriers, agents, and correspondents that would be faster and more reliable than any government postal service. He then deployed his sons like a general, deploying his armies to conquer the financial capitals of the continent. Amschel Mayer remained in Frankfurt, guarding the home bank and managing the crucial relationship with Prince Wilhelm. Salomon Mayer was sent to Vienna, the opulent and conservative heart of the Habsburg Empire. Nathan Mayer, the most brilliant and forceful of the brothers, was dispatched to London, the emerging financial capital of the world. Kalman Karl Mayer was sent to Naples to tap into the finances of the Italian states and the papacy. Jacob James Mayer, the youngest, was established in Paris, the political vortex of Europe. The stage was set, the 5 arrows were knocked, and the world, convulsed by the ambitions of a Corsican artillery officer named Napoleon Bonaparte, was about to give them their moment. The era of the Rothschilds, the era where a family business would become the hidden engine of European history, was about to begin. The 5 arrows had been lost from the Frankfurt ghetto. While Amschel held the fort and Salomon prepared for his diplomatic mission to Vienna, it was the 3rd son, Nathan Mayer, who would make the most audacious and impactful move. He was not sent to London. He fought his way there, and in doing so, he transformed the family from a successful German banking house into a global financial power. Nathan arrived in England in 1799, not in the grand financial center of London, but in the smoky, industrial powerhouse of Manchester. His father had given him a mission to sell the family's stockpile of English textiles and other goods, trapped on the continent due to the Napoleonic Wars. But Nathan, even in his early 20s, was a force of nature, brash, brilliant, and possessing an almost supernatural instinct for markets. He saw not a simple liquidation, but an opportunity. continental system, Napoleon's blockade, designed to cripple British trade, had created massive arbitrage opportunities. Goods that could bypass the blockade were worth many times their original value. Nathan, using his father's capital and his own nerve, began a breathtaking operation. He didn't just sell the existing stock, he became a master smuggler and a textile magnate. He bought high-quality British cloth in Manchester, organized clandestine shipping routes to break the blockade, and sold it at a huge premium in Germany and across Europe. He was funneling the lifeblood of trade through Napoleon's cracks and making a fortune in the process. But Nathan's true genius lay in his understanding of a fundamental principle. Moving money was often more profitable than moving goods. He noticed a critical financial problem. The British government needed to ship vast quantities of gold, literally tons of it, to its armies and allies on the continent to fund the war against Napoleon. This was incredibly risky, slow, and expensive. At the same time, British manufacturers needed to be paid for the goods they were sending to Europe. Nathan saw a beautiful, elegant solution. He offered the British government a deal. Don't ship the gold. Instead, he would use his family's burgeoning network. He would buy the gold from the British Treasury in London at a favorable rate. Then, using the Rothschilds' unmatched communication and agent network, his brothers on the continent, James in Paris, Salomon in Vienna, Karl in Amsterdam, would arrange for the equivalent value to be paid to the British Army's suppliers and allies in local currency. The physical gold never had to cross the channel. Nathan had invented a sophisticated form of hawala, or wire transfer, on a geopolitical scale. He was solving the British government's most pressing logistical nightmare, and in return, he was paid handsomely in commissions and favorable exchange rates. He had become indispensable. His move from Manchester to London around 1809 was the final piece of the puzzle. He established N.M. Rothschild at New Court in the city of London, right in the heart of global finance. He was an outsider, a German Jew with a heavy accent and blunt manners, but his capital, his connections, and his undeniable results commanded respect. He quickly mastered the London bond market, trading British government consols with a boldness that stunned his more conservative competitors. A key moment came during the Panic of 1810. A major British ally, the Duke of Wellington's brother, was defaulting on a massive loan. The market panicked. Nathan, displaying his characteristic cool-headedness, analyzed the situation and concluded the British government would ultimately honor the debt to avoid a catastrophic loss of confidence. While others sold in a frenzy, he bought up the devalued bonds at a fraction of their price. He was right. The government stepped in, the bonds soared, and Nathan pocketed another fortune. His reputation was sealed. Nathan Mayer Rothschild was the man with the best information and the strongest nerve in London. It was this combination, a fearless financier in the world's capital, working in perfect sync with his brothers across a war-torn continent, that set the stage for the family's most legendary moment, the moment that would cement their name in history and in myth, the Battle of Waterloo. In June 1815, the fate of Europe hung in the balance. Napoleon had escaped from exile and was marching to meet the armies of the Duke of Wellington and Gebhard von Blücher at a small Belgian town called Waterloo. The British government and the entire financial world were paralyzed, waiting for news. A British victory would mean peace and soaring markets. A French victory would mean continued war and financial collapse. Nathan Rothschild had one objective: get the news first. His network swung into action. He had his own agents shadowing the armies, not soldiers, but financiers with fast horses and a keen understanding of what to look for. The legend, romanticized over time, tells of a lone Rothschild agent named Rothworth who witnessed the battle's outcome, raced to the channel through a storm, and delivered the news to Nathan at New Court a full day before the government's own messenger. What Nathan did next is the subject of the most enduring Rothschild myth. The story goes that he went to the London Stock Exchange and stood at his usual pillar. He did not smile. He did not celebrate. Instead, he began to sell. He sold his British government consols. A trickle at first, then a flood. The other traders saw this. Rothschild knows, the whisper went through the hall. Wellington has lost. A panic ensued. The floor became a frenzy of selling. The price of consols plummeted to unimaginable lows. And then, at the very bottom, Nathan secretly gave the order. Dozens of his agents, stationed throughout the exchange, began to buy. They bought every single bond they could find at these rock-bottom prices. Only when the buying was complete did the official news arrive. Wellington had won decisively at Waterloo. The market exploded upwards. Nathan Rothschild was said to have made a profit of over £20 million in a single day, a sum worth billions today. The historical truth is likely more nuanced, but no less brilliant. The family's own records don't show a single, massive speculative windfall from that one day. It's probable that Nathan did get early, credible intelligence. But instead of a theatrical ruse, he used his knowledge with confidence. He didn't need to manipulate the market. He simply knew the outcome before anyone else. He began buying in a quiet, controlled manner, using the prevailing uncertainty to his advantage. He may have also used the information to make huge, confident bets on the currency and commodities markets, knowing peace was at hand. But the power of the Waterloo myth is what matters. It cemented the Rothschilds' reputation in the public imagination as masters of information, as men who could see the future and were cold and cunning enough to profit from the misery of others. It reinforced the idea of their hidden hand. From that day forward, no one in Europe doubted the speed, reach, and power of the Rothschild intelligence network. They had proven they were faster than governments. The five brothers were now more than just bankers. They were an essential piece of European infrastructure. And as the dust settled on the battlefield of Waterloo, a new continent needed to be rebuilt. The Rothschilds were ready to finance its future. With the Napoleonic Wars concluded, Europe stood at a crossroads. The old monarchies, embodied by the conservative powers of Austria, Russia, and Prussia, were desperate to reassert their authority and stamp out the revolutionary flames that had scorched the continent for a quarter century. This era, known as the Restoration, required a new kind of weapon, not just armies, but capital. Vast, liquid, and reliable capital. And there was only one family that could provide it on the scale required. The Rothschilds were no longer just a successful family business. They had become a multinational financial institution before the term even existed. The five brothers, Amschel in Frankfurt, Salomon in Vienna, Nathan in London, Karl in Naples, and James in Paris, operated with a synergy that was utterly revolutionary. They were the five fingers of a single hand, and that hand was now closing around the purse strings of a continent. Their first and greatest advantage was their private communication network. While governments relied on slow, bureaucratic diplomatic pouches, the Rothschilds had their own couriers, a team of trusted agents on fast horses and swift ships, carrying letters written in a mixture of German Hebrew and their own coded jargon. A message from Nathan in London could reach James in Paris, or more importantly, Salomon in Vienna, days before official dispatches arrived. This network was their nervous system, carrying not just family news, but priceless political and financial intelligence. They knew of crop failures, political scandals, and potential wars before their competitors, and often before the governments they served. Their second advantage was their unity. They traded with each other constantly, creating an internal capital market. If gold was cheap in London and expensive in Paris, Nathan would buy and James would sell, making a risk-free profit for the family firm. They could move immense sums across borders without the money ever physically moving, using a sophisticated system of bills, of exchange, and mutual credit. A loan from the British government to Austria would would see Nathan pay out sterling in London, while Salomon delivered guilders in Vienna. It was seamless, efficient, and beyond the control of any single government. It was Salomon Rothschild in Vienna who perfected the art of financial diplomacy. His target was Prince Clemens von Metternich, the Austrian chancellor and the architect of the Restoration. Metternich wanted to preserve the Habsburg Empire, suppress liberalism and nationalism, and maintain Austria's dominance in Central Europe. Salomon's mission was to make himself indispensable to this goal. He approached Metternich not as a supplicant, but as a partner. He was charming, discreet, and unfailingly useful. When Metternich needed to silence a critical newspaper, Salomon provided a loan to its publisher on condition of a more favorable editorial line. When the Austrian treasury was empty after decades of war, Salomon structured a massive bond issue, using the family's credibility to attract investors from across Europe. He didn't just lend money, he provided financial solutions to political problems. In return, Metternich granted the Rothschilds what they craved most: social legitimacy and official status. In 1822, the five brothers were granted the hereditary title of barons by the Austrian emperor. The sons of the Frankfurt ghetto were now part of the formal aristocracy of the most prestigious court in Europe. This was not just an honor, it was a business tool. A baron could walk into palaces, dine with princes, and secure contracts that were closed to mere merchants. Meanwhile, in Paris, the youngest brother, James, was performing a similar high-wire act. Post-Napoleonic France was politically volatile, swinging between monarchy and revolution. James, who established the Rothschild friars, understood that his client was not a king, but the French state itself. He financed the restored Bourbon monarchy, then smoothly transitioned to backing the citizen king, Louis Philippe. After the July Revolution of 1830, his power was so palpable that the German poet Heinrich Heine wrote, "Money is the god of our time, and Rothschild is his prophet." James's opulent parties were not just displays of wealth, they were strategic events where politics and finance were fused. He built the magnificent Château de Ferrières, a palace that dwarfed the royal residences, a clear signal of where the real power resided. While Salomon courted emperors and James managed revolutions, Nathan in London provided the rock-solid financial foundation. The London market was the deepest and most stable in the world. Nathan's unparalleled reputation allowed him to raise colossal sums for his brother's continental ventures. He was the anchor of the entire operation, his credit and his nerve allowing the family to take risks that would have broken any other bank. Karl in Naples and Amschel in Frankfurt played equally crucial, if less flashy, roles. Karl became the principal banker to the Papal States, and the Kingdom of the Two Sicilies, weaving the Rothschild web into the fabric of Italy. Amschel, the faithful eldest son, managed the original Frankfurt bank and the delicate relationship with their first great patron, the Elector of Hesse-Kassel, ensuring the family's roots remained strong. Together, they financed the very system designed to prevent change. They provided the loans that allowed the Holy Alliance to garrison its armies, pay its bureaucrats, and suppress rebellions. It was a profound irony. A family that had risen from the oppression of the ghetto was now the chief financier of the most oppressive regimes in Europe. For the Rothschilds, it was never about ideology. It was about stability. Stable governments, even repressive ones, honored their debts. The revolution was bad for business, but their vision was not limited to war and state finance. They were also the great modernizers. In the 1830s and 40s, they saw the future in steam and steel. Nathan, and after his death in 1836, his son Lionel began financing the revolutionary new technology of railways. James in France built the Chemin de Fer du Nord, one of the country's main railway lines. They financed mining companies and industrial ventures. They were, quite literally, building the new Europe, laying the tracks that would eventually break down the old borders and social orders their government clients were so desperate to preserve. By the 1840s, the Rothschilds were at the absolute zenith of their power. They were more than bankers. They were a force of nature. A French minister once quipped, "There is only one power in Europe, and that is Rothschild." Yet, even at this height, new challenges were gathering. The very nationalism they had financed the empires to suppress was rising again. And in the crowded, industrial cities their railways connected, new social and political ideas were brewing. Ideas that would question the very foundation of their wealth and power. The era of the brothers was drawing to a close, and the next generation would have to navigate a world far more complex than their fathers could ever have imagined. The era of the five brothers, that unparalleled partnership, could not last forever. The first and most devastating blow came in 1836, with the sudden death of Nathan Mayer Rothschild in Frankfurt from a septic abscess. He was just 58. The news sent shockwaves through the financial world. The Lion of London, the anchor of the entire Rothschild system, was gone. His brothers were bereft. Salomon wrote, "I can hardly believe it. Our house has lost its chief, its soul, its guide." The family's central nervous system had been severed, but Nathan's death also proved the resilience of the system he and his father had built. the business did not falter. It passed, not to a single heir, but to the next generation, a new cohort of Rothschilds who had been groomed for leadership since birth. They were raised in palaces, educated by tutors, and integrated into the highest echelons of European society in a way their fathers could never have imagined. Their challenge would be to steward the dynasty through a century of rapid industrialization, rising nationalism, and virulent new forms of anti-Semitism. In London, Nathan's mantle was taken up by his son, Lionel de Rothschild. He inherited his father's financial acumen, but not his brash, outsider personality. Lionel was a calm, determined, and impeccably English gentleman, yet he faced a barrier his father had never had to confront directly: political exclusion. Despite his wealth and status as a Jew, he was barred from taking his seat in the British House of Commons, to which he was first elected in 1847. What followed was an 11-year political and personal crusade. Every time Lionel was elected by the voters of the City of London, he would travel to Parliament and be refused entry because he would not take the Christian oath of office. It was a public, humiliating ritual that highlighted the lingering prejudices of the British establishment. But Lionel, with the full backing of the family's resources and influence, refused to back down. He fought not with finance, but with principle, lobbying tirelessly for a change in the law. Finally, in 1858, the political dam broke. The British Parliament passed the Jews' Relief Act, allowing Lionel to swear an oath on the Hebrew Bible. His entry into the House of Commons was a landmark victory, not just for one man, but for Jewish emancipation across the British Empire. When he finally took his seat, a friend reportedly joked, "Now you are nobody, just one of 656. But he was wrong. Lionel was a symbol. He had broken a centuries-old barrier, proving that the Rothschilds could not only influence power from the outside, but could now wield it from within. On the continent, the political landscape was even more turbulent. The revolutions of 1848, which swept across Europe, were a direct threat to the conservative order the Rothschilds had bankrolled. Mobs, fueled by economic hardship and nationalist fervor, targeted their properties. In Paris, a crowd stormed the Tuileries Palace and then marched on James's magnificent home, seeing it as a symbol of the corrupt financial aristocracy. James, ever the pragmatist, fled to London for safety. The experience was a stark reminder that their wealth made them targets. Yet, once again, they adapted. As the revolutionary fires burned out, the Rothschilds proved to be essential partners for the new regimes that emerged. They helped finance the Second French Empire under Napoleon III, with James's son, Alphonse, playing a key role. In Austria, the family continued to be the primary bankers to the Habsburg monarchy. Even as it weakened, this period also saw the family diversify its legacy in more tangible cultural ways. They became the greatest art collectors of their age, filling their palatial homes with old masters, Renaissance treasures, and Sevres porcelain. But their most enduring passion, beyond finance, became wine. It was James who had purchased the esteemed Chateau Lafite in 1868, just a few months before his death. Under the Rothschilds, Lafite, and later Chateau Mouton Rothschild, acquired by Nathaniel de Rothschild, an English branch of the family, were transformed into the legendary, globally recognized brands they are today. This was not merely a hobby. It was a brilliant, long-term investment in terroir and prestige, creating a legacy that was literally bottled and could be appreciated for centuries. It grounded their ethereal wealth in something concrete and culturally resonant. However, as the 19th century wore on, the world of finance was changing. The rise of joint stock banks, like Crédit Mobilier in France, presented new, powerful competitors. The Rothschilds, with their insistence on private, family-only partnerships, were sometimes seen as relics of a bygone era. Their absolute dominance was being challenged by a new, more corporate form of capitalism, and a darker shadow was lengthening. The same period saw the rise of a new, racialized antisemitism, distinct from the older religious prejudice. The Rothschilds, as the most successful Jewish family in the world, became the ultimate villains in a sprawling conspiracy theory. Pamphlets and newspapers caricatured them as octopuses, their tentacles strangling the nations of Europe. They were falsely accused of starting wars for profit and manipulating stock markets to impoverish the common man. This toxic mythology would find its most infamous expression in the forged document known as the Protocols of the Elders of Zion, which plagiarized a fictional satire and presented it as the Rothschilds' secret plan for world domination. These lies, though repeatedly debunked, took on a life of their own. By the dawn of the 20th century, the Rothschilds were in a paradoxical position. They were richer and more integrated into the aristocracy than ever before. They were philanthropists, patrons of the arts, and respected statesmen. Yet, they were also the scapegoats for every modern anxiety, the shadowy, hidden hand in a world growing increasingly unstable. The unified Europe they had helped finance was fracturing, and the family, now spread across nations with competing interests, was about to face its greatest test, a world war that would pit cousin against cousin and shatter the old order forever. The 20th century arrived, And with it, the storm that would forever break the world the Rothschilds had helped to build, the delicate balance of power in Europe, maintained for a century through diplomacy, and the very capital they provided, shattered in the cataclysm of the First World War. For the first time, the family's international nature became a crippling liability. The British and French Rothschilds found themselves citizens of nations at war with the German and Austrian Rothschilds. The unified Five Arrows were now bent against each other. The war was a personal and professional tragedy. The family's vast network, once its greatest strength, was severed. Assets were frozen. Communication became impossible. On the battlefields, young Rothschilds served their respective countries. Lionel de Rothschild's son, Evelyn, served with distinction for Britain, while his Austrian cousin, Albert, served the Habsburg Emperor. The family that had transcended borders was now trapped by them. The aftermath was even worse. The Austro-Hungarian and German empires, their oldest and most loyal clients, collapsed. The Russian Revolution wiped out the entire branch of the family that had settled there. Along with any debts the Tsarist regime owed them, the map of Europe was redrawn, not by bankers and diplomats, but by vengeful treaties and volatile new nation-states. The world of Metternich was dead, and the Rothschilds' foundational business, issuing sovereign debt to stable monarchies, was in ruins. But the greatest, most sinister threat was yet to come. The virulent anti-Semitic conspiracy theories that had festered in the late 19th century found their ultimate expression in the rise of Adolf Hitler and the Nazi Party. The Rothschilds were explicitly targeted as the archetypal, evil Jewish financiers. In 1938, following the Anschluss that merged Austria with Germany, the Gestapo stormed the magnificent Palais Rothschild in Vienna. The family was forced at gunpoint to sign over their entire Austrian assets for a pittance. It was a brutal, state-sanctioned theft. The same scene played out across Nazi-occupied Europe. The world they had shaped now sought to erase them. Yet, even in this darkness, there were acts of defiance and resilience. The French Rothschilds, under the leadership of Edouard and Robert, managed to hide priceless art collections and transfer some assets abroad before the Nazi occupation. The British family worked tirelessly to aid Jewish refugees fleeing the continent. The war effort against the Axis became a deeply personal fight for survival, not just of their business, but of their very identity and people. The end of the Second World War left Europe in ashes, and the Rothschild power profoundly diminished. The age of the great family-owned international bank was over, replaced by massive American investment banks and state-led reconstruction. The family had to adapt once more, and they did so by consolidating and specializing. In France, Guy de Rothschild rebuilt the Paris house, merging it with the English branch in the 1960s to form a stronger entity. But in 1981, the family faced its last great political challenge: the election of socialist President François Mitterrand, who nationalized all French banks, including Rothschild Freers. It was a stunning blow, yet the then head of the French house, Baron David de Rothschild, refused to surrender. Starting with just a small team and the invaluable Rothschild name, he built a new, leaner, advisory-focused investment bank from scratch. Within a decade, it was a power again, a testament to the enduring potency of the brand. In England, N.M. Rothschild and Sons remained a pillar of the city. Though no longer its undisputed master, it became a leader in the niche, but powerful world of mergers and acquisitions, famously advising the British government on the privatization of British steel and British coal. The family's influence shifted from being the primary source of capital to being the most trusted advisors to those who had it. So, what is the legacy of the House of Rothschild in the 21st century? The conspiracy theories, of course, persist. In the dark corners of the internet, they are still blamed for every financial crisis and global event. A tired and hateful myth that refuses to die, but the reality is far more complex and far more human. Their power is no longer the hidden hand of the 19th century. It is visible in their enduring businesses, which remain privately held and fiercely independent. It is visible in their legendary vineyards, Lafite, Mouton, and others, which represent a commitment to quality and a tangible link to the earth. Most profoundly, it is visible in their philanthropy. For generations, the Rothschilds have funded hospitals, universities, scientific research, and the arts on a staggering scale. Their name adorns wings of the Louvre and the Tate Gallery, and their foundations support breakthroughs in medicine, environmental science, and Jewish culture. They shaped Europe not as a secret cabal, but as the master architects of the modern financial system. They demonstrated the power of information, the strength of family unity, and the transformative potential of capital. They financed both the empires that resisted change and the railroads that made that change inevitable. Their story is the ultimate drama, a rise from the most profound oppression to the highest peaks of influence, a tale of genius, unity, and relentless adaptation. It is a story that holds a mirror to the birth of our modern world, with all its contradictions of progress and prejudice, of immense wealth and profound responsibility. The red shield that once hung in a cramped Frankfurt ghetto became a symbol of a dynasty that, for better or worse, truly did help shape the destiny of a continent.